Hey friends, welcome back to Survival Line Healing Podcast. This is episode 99, and we are just going to continue with the COVID theme. This one is COVID and co-infections. So again, this is the Dr. Carmen show.
So we thought this would be helpful to understand a little bit more. So we are seeing sort of across the board these co-infections with COVID. And some of the folks who were ending up in the hospital with the COVID infections at the beginning, and even now with COVID, and it turns into COVID pneumonia, and they may be placed on ventilators. Oftentimes, if they have an infectious disease doc on board, they'll test for other kind of obscure viruses and find that those co-infections are present. Okay. Now, for some folks, like that is sort of our worst case scenario. But what we're seeing are some of those long-term co-infections that a lot of people with chronic illness struggle with, right? People who have fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, people who may have chronic Lyme disease, chronic mono or EBV, or CMV, which is cytomegalovirus. EBV is Epstein-Barr virus. And they have a tendency to go in remission, right? They estimate that the majority of the population in the US have been exposed to Epstein-Barr virus by the time they're 9, more so if they play in the dirt, right? So because it's a natural virus that's in our environment. And so, but not everybody becomes ill because their immune system, if you're at a young age and you get exposed to EB or mono, and your immune system is robust, oftentimes you recover from that illness just fine. Okay. Now, for some folks who, right, mono is known as the kissing virus, who get it in college, they get really fatigued. They may recover, they may get better, but never like 100% feel like themselves and always have this fatigue. That's usually where the immune system wasn't able to mount a response early enough to get that virus under control. So then it kind of lingers. It lingers, and then it can flare up when we're older. It can be a trigger to autoimmune diseases. So those types of infections, if those viruses, because sometimes if they don't completely clear from our body, other examples of viruses that do this are things in the human herpes virus family. So like HSV1 or 2, the herpes family viruses, things like shingles, like chicken pox, things like hand, foot, and mouth disease, right? Those are all what we call DNA viruses that have a tendency to linger in our body. Okay. So, and they can create flares. So to tie this in, what happens when we have COVID, oftentimes our immune system still mounts a response, okay? What we're looking at and what we're seeing is those microbiologists are getting a little bit more information, and they're seeing that the COVID virus, those spike proteins and the RNA within the virus, what it can do is it can actually stun our T cells. These T cells are called TLR. You have toll-like receptor cells and you have T cells. And our T cells are kind of like our library, right? Every virus we've ever been exposed to, or bacteria or fungus, our body creates that immune response at that time, and then it makes a library. It puts it in the library and says, hey, in case we ever see this pathogen again, we know what to do, right? So when the COVID virus, when we become infected with the COVID virus, it can stun those T cells, or those, it's the TLR cells and the T cells. So what is supposed to happen is your body says, hey, this is foreign. Let's see if we have anything in our library that looks like this, okay? So that they can know what to do, how to respond. Well, if you stun those T cells, they can't go to the library and say, hey, have we seen this before? How do we keep this under control, right? So then, it kicks off the immune system, that whole immune cascade. Body does what it's supposed to, attack that virus. Now, what we're also seeing is usually those, when it does that, when our immune system is busy attacking that COVID virus, okay, it's most of those viruses in our body, if they're lingering, they're opportunists, right? So they will say, hey, there are not any more guards standing at the tower trying to keep us under control, right? So they will rear their head and they will take the opportunity to break out, right? And your immune system is already busy with this virus, COVID virus. The T cells that are circulating, that are supposed to be looking in the library to say, hey, this is foreign. This is something that was hiding in our body. This shouldn't be here. They're stunned. So they're not available to mount a second response or tell your other, reserves, say, hey, you need to target this virus as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we get these co-infections. Now, to be honest, these co-infections, the list is very long, and I'm not an infectious disease doctor, but you can see some of them may be really random, right? Things like they're seeing the Zika virus being reinfected. If people were infected with the Zika virus, I don't even remember how many years ago that was. Things like West Nile, right? Things like dengue fever, things like even I've heard of a couple of cases of like malaria even being I guess triggered, if you will, because of this relationship of how COVID is affecting our immune system. Yeah. The reason why I think this is important to know is for if you experience chronic illness, right? And whether that infection has ever been identified or not, it's still significant to recognize, right? A lot of folks don't recognize or haven't identified chronic mono or chronic Epstein-Barr virus. Usually not until you see a naturopathic doctor or integrative or functional medicine doctor, they start looking at that because that affects a lot of folks. Since, that's the root cause for autoimmune disease, right? That's a potential root cause for chronic fatigue syndrome or for fibromyalgia. And we see those, are very common in our population. And so we can get flares from these chronic illnesses, right? We know things like shingles is very common, right? Shingles is very common. It's very painful. And oftentimes people think of, okay, well, usually if we get stressed, if we get exposed to shingles or we get exposed to chicken pox, we could break out in a shingles rash. But that's probably the easiest, most common one that we're seeing, besides like the pneumonias. But even now with the Omicron variant, it's lessening. So you're seeing more flu, like flu's kind of, it's not coming back, but we're getting more positive cases of flu, strep. We're seeing COVID and strep. We're seeing that a lot in the schools right now. And it's because it's kind of stunning that piece of our immune system. So if people normally get strep or normally get bronchitis this time of year, sometimes their strep or their bronchitis is getting a little worse because your immune system doesn't have that reference library that it's so used to looking at, right? So that your illness doesn't last as long. So it's kind of like your body's looking at it as a new, again, a new infection again, because it doesn't have access to the library.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. These are just my thoughts. So, it's almost like this virus was specifically genetically engineered. Yeah. Anyways, so because I have to take it to the real world, right? It sounds like, oh, let's take this virus. It's a super highly intelligent military operation, introduce it to the body, kidnap the librarian, hold her hostage so she can't go and look for any of the references, right? So then all the other hidden military regimes that are hidden in the body can go ahead and surface. So our military operation plus the hidden ones can just go ahead and take over.
It's a very calculated attack. Yes. Yeah. So this is what's very different about this virus than other viruses that we've seen, is because they don't have the intelligence to be able to take out those other pieces or those other components of our immune system. That's what's so different with this virus. And that's why a lot of the infection was so overwhelming at the beginning, and I mean, people were dying at very high rates. When it was more not very pathogenic, is because of these mechanisms on how they were strategically affecting our body and taking out our reserves and our resources. Yeah,
wiping out the immune system, our line of defense.
Yes. Yeah.
So I have a question, and it kind of is on topic, but maybe not. People, like, if you're a kid and you had Epstein-Barr or mono or chickenpox, because our generation we weren't vaccinated for chickenpox.
Yes.
Does that make you more likely to pick up these DNA chronic viruses? Like, if you have chickenpox, does it make you more likely than to get mono and then to get HSV, or you know what I'm saying? Or not to get them, maybe to lose the ability to clear those?
I do understand your question. I don't know, to be honest. I don't think so. Because in general, these viruses are usually like individual. So it determines, or it is determined by your exposure, right? What you're exposed to. It just, it happens to be that this family of DNA viruses, people may be exposed to more than others. But I don't know that it sets you up to be more susceptible or less likely, to clear the virus, like the next virus in the family. Yeah, I don't know that to be true.
Yeah, because it's interesting. Like, I had chickenpox, right? I had West Nile. We've decided that I either had mono or Epstein-Barr, right? Now I've had COVID. Like, those all, like, and my body, I think we're thinking, like, has not cleared them.
Right. Yeah. I think that the relationship is that, the DNA viruses, how they invade the body, and how they have a tendency to linger. And since, we are DNA animals, right, it's easy for them to hide. But I don't know. That's worth looking into. I'll have to do a little bit more homework in that regard, in that field, to try and see if there's evidence there.
What I'm hearing you say is, like, some people actually clear those and like fully get rid of that virus. My education was like, oh, once you have it, like, you just always have that virus for the rest of your life. And I'm learning that's not true. There's just a percentage of us that our bodies don't do a good job of clearing that virus fully. Some do.
Right. So, for example, chickenpox, right? When we were a kid, we were told you've got chickenpox once and you're done, right? You've you were exposed to chickenpox, your immune system mounted a response, it put it in the library and said, hey, this is a DNA virus, this is chickenpox. If we ever see chickenpox again, we know what to do, right? And then, but that's not entirely true. People do get chickenpox more than once. That virus is very, no, it can mutate if we do not clear it. It can become a chronic infection, and it's an opportunist, so it can manifest as shingles when we get older, right? People don't call that chickenpox, but it's, yeah, same family. So it waits for that opportunity, right? When we say that opportunity, usually it's high stress, when our immune system is less responsive. It sticks its head out and says, hey, is now a good time to to come out. And so in those cases, the virus wasn't cleared. It wasn't entirely killed. It found a way to hide within our DNA, within our cells, before our immune system could neutralize it. And so then it comes up differently. Things like shingles, chickenpox, same thing with like HSV1 and HSV2, right? That if it's the evolution of those viruses, because we said before, viruses are organisms, they want to stay alive. That's their whole motive. It's like, hey, the longer we can stay alive, we're doing a good job. The longer we can stay alive and replicate, we can make more offspring and infect more hosts. So that's why these DNA viruses have found mechanisms to hide within the human body, because it's like, oh, okay, if we can evade the immune system, then we can live another day to replicate and release more viral particles to infect somebody else. So that's why they're very good at hiding, because they've evolved to do that. They just hide within our body, and that's why we call them those opportunists. Gotcha. It's just so tricky with COVID is because since it neutralizes, or not neutralizes, takes out that reference system, it just creates an environment that's so readily available for all those opportunists to strike at once. And so even folks, so I know that, I was focusing on like DNA viruses, but even folks who are carriers of staph and strep, Staphylococcus aureus and Streptococcus are, can be natural flora in and on our body. But for some folks, they call them carriers, where those bacteria, are found within certain mucous membranes of our body. And so again, it can be an opportunist. So when it sees, the environment within our body and our immune systems change with the COVID infections, it'll rear its head too. So we're seeing a lot of, like I said, strep, but like you can get staph pneumonia, you can get staph UTIs, you can get staph skin infections, right? Boils that may be on people's skin. And so it's just creating an environment for a lot of things to pop up, if you will.
What a cluster. Because COVID is it's new, it's hard for our body, it's hard on us, right? The bradykinins from last episode now create this environment to have blood clots and blood pressure issues, right? And then our opportunistic viruses that some people now have an open play date. Like, no wonder the system isn't overwhelmed. Like, our poor little body.
Right. So it's, when we talked about, COVID long haulers. So sometimes we are seeing, folks who either had autoimmune disease prior to becoming ill with COVID, but maybe it was in remission, right? And it's kind of come back with a flare, or new onset of autoimmune diseases. We're seeing that as well from things like mixed connective tissue disorders, or like lupus or Crohn's with the digestive tract. We're seeing new onsets, or thyroid, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, new onsets of autoimmune diseases after COVID infections.
And I'm in my brain, that's because of the bradykinins.
A big piece of it is bradykinins, and how it's kind of scrambled the inflammatory response. But if they had underlying viruses, especially like, again, mono, shingles, Lyme, those can be triggers for autoimmune disease, because again, autoimmune diseases, the immune system's not regulated, right? Like your body's making all these immune cells because it knows it's what it's supposed to do. But if the instructions on where those immune cells should be targeting, what they should specifically be going after, because our library has been taken out. Yeah, it's offline. So in your body's trying to do what it, is programmed, if you will, right? Like your body says, hey, you started an immune response. I know that I need to make immune cells, but it goes unregulated because there's pieces missing and directions missing in the manual to tell it where to go and what to do, or just where to go. Yeah, it knows what to do, but so that's another like long-term thing we're seeing is with these co-infections. So and I think that's a big piece that makes it challenging for folks long-term, is because, they're over COVID, but it's the aftermath. And now if it's this other infection that is just starting up again, and your body's exhausted, you're exhausted. And it just, I think it's important to know that is happening with folks. So then you can better target it. Because a lot of people don't feel like they have a lot of options, because people are like, if you go to the conventional doc, or even if you go to the hospital, if you've had COVID, they put you in the COVID box. But then they're not exploring other infectious diseases. They're not exploring those co-infections. And it's like, okay, well, they keep testing you for COVID. And when you're COVID negative and you have antibodies, they're like, great, you're well, go about your, life. And nobody's giving folks resources of like how to maneuver through long-term infections that are now flared, that are now creating these symptoms again, whether they knew they had that co-infection or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, you had a good point, and I wanted to comment. Oh yeah, I want to make sure that everybody understands that we are referencing, when we say COVID and having COVID, it mainly is what's causing all the chaos is the spike protein.
Yes.
That is in the vaccines too.
Oh, yes.
So if you have COVID, or if you're taking the vaccines and boosters, this is for you as well, because you're exposed to the spike protein.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, because that's what's the similarity, right, is that spike protein and the mRNA instructions that come with it. Yeah, in the vaccine to tell your body to make that spike protein. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
I just didn't want like vaxxers to be like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. I haven't had COVID. Yeah, it does.
It does apply to you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Some of the adverse effects that we're seeing, like with the vaccine, some of it has been associated with co-infections, but the majority of those adverse events have been associated with the immune system. Yeah. And that bradykinin unregulation. So, but you can still, it's still a possibility, right? It's the same mechanism, and you're getting the spike protein in multiple ways. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
yeah. So I guess, what else?
So I think I don't have a lot of solutions for this one. Unfortunately, I like to have solutions. I don't have a lot of solutions for this one. This is more to help to plant that seed, right? To help people identify of like, hey, you know what? If you're not feeling right 100% after the vaccine or after your infection, consider, right, that it could be a co-infection. It could be something that has flared up. If you've had trouble getting your shingles outbreaks under control, or HSV outbreaks under control after the vaccine or after infection, consider, that, hey, this is because your immune system has kind of been targeted by these spike proteins. And so you're going to have to do more to get those infections under control, right? It is supporting your immune system, but it's also going to be doing more antiviral things for the specific co-infections, because it's kind of like you have to treat that infection like you haven't seen it before, right? So you're going to have to dose things high, and it depends on what infection you have, whether it's shingles, whether it's mono, whether it's Lyme. Yeah. So I can't be specific with those recommendations because it is different for each virus, or even if it's staph or strep. But you're going to have to treat it like if you remember being infected before, you're going to have to treat it like that, where high dose things, acute illness, that this isn't just a regular flare. This is a flare that may be a little bit longer because your immune system is still recovering.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is it's an opportunity to finally kill it, perhaps.
Yeah, if it's active and if it's not hiding, yes, this is an opportunity. You just have to hit it hard. You have to do things, very acutely. And so instead of people sitting on it and letting it linger because they're like, oh, this must just be a stressful period. It may look like a regular flare, but it's a little bit different with COVID. So address it like you would initial reaction.
And I think maybe sometimes this may be the first time some people have even heard that these DNA, I guess is what I can call them, viruses, like that whole family that we just talked about.
Oh, yes.
Can actually be killed. Because, right, conventional medicine tells us that it can't, that you just have to live with it. So I want you to be able to express the hope to these people that these viruses can be eliminated from the body.
Yes, it's often a matter of timing. And you have to be as sneaky as the virus is because the virus will hide the first chance it gets, right? It's an opportunist. So as long as the environment looks like, hey, I'm not going to be hurt, I can just replicate and spread my viral particles to infect somebody else and grow. But as soon as sort of that first sign of they're shy, right? Of oh, that looks dangerous. They can go and they've got mechanisms to hide within our body, within our nerve cells or other places. And so, but while they are exposed, if you will, taking advantage of the opportunity, yes, you can kill those viruses. You have to do it strategically, and you've got to do high loading doses for certain things.
Cool. I think that's going to blow people's mind because that's not the message that's communicated.
Yeah. You don't have to suffer from that if we can manipulate things to kill those viruses and support your body a little bit more.
Anything else, Fred?
No, I think that was the major things I wanted to share with people today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Carmen.
Thank you.
All right, friends, we'll see you guys next week for episode 100. Yeah.